This is Ask Congress, the show that seeks to facilitate and expand personal relationships between the viewing public and the representatives that they place in power. You know, it's our goal to create avenues of communication that will break barriers of location and nationality and culture and bring about a true sense of a global community. Today we're privileged to have on our program the distinguished Congressman Boyle from Pennsylvania's 13th District. Congressman Boyle earned his bachelor's degree at Notre Dame and his master's from Harvard. I don't know whether that's good or bad. Prior to joining the Congress, he served in the Pennsylvania State Legislature. Congressman Boyle currently serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Congressman, welcome to Ask Congress.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This is your first term.
It is. I'm all of a few months into the job. So,
how do you like the job so far?
Overall, it's nice. I think I'll keep it. Although I guess ultimately it's up to the 704,000 people who live in my district or my bosses as to whether or not I will be rehired. But I like it very much, and I've always wanted. I always hesitate in saying this because people think I'm crazy, but this is what I've always wanted to do. I believe in public service, studied for it, worked very hard to get here. Didn't win when I first started out on elections, but very fortunate to be here. And so few Americans have had the opportunity to serve in Congress. To think that I'm one of them is pretty hard to believe.
Oh, how do you see this much different from your state legislature?
Yeah, so I served 3 terms in the state legislature in Pennsylvania, which is pretty analogous to here. It's a full-time legislature, meets in the Capitol 3 to 4 days a week. The state capitol is roughly a couple hours away from my home in Philadelphia, the same as Washington. So it's more similar than dissimilar. Where it is dissimilar, though, is obviously the foreign affairs dynamic. There's no equivalent to that in Pennsylvania, unless we have border issues with Maryland, and they got settled centuries ago. So really the foreign affairs aspect of it, and especially at this time,
that's right,
when we have so many serious issues going on, really there is no analogy to that in
what subcommittees are you on?
So on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and then the subcommittee is the Middle East. So we've already had hearings on the Iranian negotiations, on the war, our war against ISIS in Iraq and Syria, what's going on in Libya, the unfortunate refugee situation that spills over from Syria into Turkey, the Russia-Ukraine was a full committee hearing because of Russia's incursions into the eastern Ukraine and, of course, taking over Crimea. So, and all this has literally been just within the first couple months.
Do you see any solution there?
Which, to specifically Russia, Ukraine?
No, I mean in the Middle East itself.
Well, if I had the answer to that, it would be pretty popular. I would say that I'm, and this might be controversial, but in the short term, I'm quite pessimistic. Even though by nature I tend to be an optimist, but I'm also a realist. And in the short term, I'm quite pessimistic. The long term, I'm optimistic, but I do think that it's important to remember that, unfortunately, there's still too much of a population over there that is against Israel and doesn't accept Israel's right to exist. And they've unfortunately been told through generations of leaders that, we're close to wiping Israel off the face of the map, and that's the goal. If you would have a more pragmatic leadership that would prepare a population to say, look, a 2-state solution is the ideal. 2 states for 2 peoples living side by side, accepting one another, recognizing one another. I think eventually that'll happen, but I think it would be naive to think that we're close to that.
Well, I want to shift in the area of foreign affairs to the Irish question.
Yeah.
When I was here, strangely enough, I was the leader of the Irish caucus.
I think it's appropriate, and I know, and I thank you, by the way, because in your public service career, at a very important time with what was going on in Northern Ireland and sort of human rights abuses, you're one of the members of Congress who played a leading role in why that situation's better today than it was then.
Well, do you think it is better?
I do think it is better. It's far from perfect, though. First of all, We would not have the Good Friday Agreement if it wasn't for direct U.S. involvement from the congressional level, and then beginning with the Clinton administration from the executive level. There is no way that the British and that the mainstream unionist parties would have signed up to the Good Friday Agreement if not for American diplomatic and economic pressure. And that American dimension has been extremely important throughout the last 16, 17 years when the talks have bogged down and the government was suspended. It's really been direct American involvement that has helped bring the sides together. So I do think the situation is better, but there are still crimes and atrocities from the past, tremendous human rights violations, that it's time that all parties are fully honest about and have a truth and reconciliation similar to the path they took in South Africa.
What are your prime interests? I know you talked about the question of foreign affairs, but yeah. What is your major interest?
I would say, first of all, I tend to be a generalist. This job works well for me because I'm interested in a wide variety of topics. But if I had to choose one, I would say without question, the fact that I'm a product of an American working class, middle class, that is actually poorer today than 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and 30 years ago. I'm deeply troubled by the state of the American middle class today, the fact that it's shrinking, and the fact that opportunities for reaching the middle class and staying there are lower today than they were a generation ago. That's wrong. That's not in keeping with who we are as a country. So that overall is my major concern, and things that we can do in the short term but also in the long term to address that and make sure that every American who works hard and plays by the rules has at least the opportunities that their parents had, if not more so.
But how do we go about that?
Yeah, well, so very obviously it's more that's the goal. There's not a simple one-sentence answer, but I would throw out a couple things I think are incredibly important to that. Education, both on the preschool side and also on the higher education side. So first in the higher education, I'm the first in my family to go to college. Got there through a ton of student loans and scholarships and work-study. Unfortunately, a higher education is far more difficult to attain today, cost-wise, than any point in American history. And we are continuing to see the middle class being priced out of attaining a college education. On the opposite side of that, when you consider that in the United States we don't have much of an education system before the age of 5, we are really falling behind when it comes to the rest of the world in that. Some states, to their credit, New York, Oklahoma, Georgia, have actually moved forward and moved toward having universally available education in the pre-K years, but too much of America has not done that. So on the education realm, that has to be a major piece of it, but then also making sure that work pays. The fact that we have a minimum wage that's lower today than at any point since Harry Truman was president, that's wrong, and that clearly needs to be changed. The fact that we have a tax code in which you can have police officers and firefighters and teachers actually paying a higher tax rate than Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and Mitt Romney. That's wrong. And those are things that would have an immediate effect if they were changed today. And there are more things that we could do, but briefly, those would be the most important ones.
One of the important elements, I think, in the education field is the enormous amount of debt that a student has when they get out of college.
Yeah.
What can we do about that?
Well, first to give you an idea, and I'm not complaining. I'm lucky that I got to college and got to a great graduate school, but I'm a member of Congress now sitting here with over $50,000 in student loan debt. I'm fairly typical of my generation of folks in their 30s and in their 20s, and actually folks who are graduating now, 20 years after I did, are more likely to have six-figure student loan debt than 50,000. There are two things that we can do. First, make higher education more affordable so they don't have to incur that debt to begin with. Second thing is, for those who have incurred the debt, I have co-sponsored legislation that would allow a one-time refinancing of the interest rate. Elizabeth Warren has this bill in the Senate. I'm one of the sponsors in the House. Basically, it would allow for that refinancing, so that way the average student or graduate in repayment would be able to save several $100s a month. And keep in mind, they're not getting a freebie. We're not talking about debt being forgiven. We're just simply giving them the same rate that banks borrow from the federal government, no more or no less. So that is one very meaningful difference that would literally add billions of dollars into the pockets of young people, of graduates, and then that's money they could in turn use to help stimulate the economy.
Congressman, we must cut away from you for just a minute, and we'll be back to you right after the break.
All right.